concerted and, a more focused entryway into these freestanding spiritual, non-corporeal realms.
So now these realms, you mentioned earlier that they were somehow hampered in the sense that they had an interest in perhaps recovering or understanding emotional content that they didn't have it themselves, and yet at the same time they could be terrifying, even dangerous. And this seems like a kind of a contradiction to me, that something that had no emotions would be able to be terrifying or even want to be. It implies that it could get angry at least.
Yeah, well, I think what may have been, behind their terrifying demeanor was to kind of, was in a way to experience humans' fear, almost in some ways to feed off of it, to absorb it somehow, as part of what, as a part of what they were unable to experience on their own. So they weren't angry as much as they may have been acting angry in order to stimulate certain, emotional reactions in us.
Did you have the feeling or have the thought ever that they were trying to consume, in a way, those reactions? In other words, they wanted to absorb these emotional states? Yeah,
I think in some cases, there was one volunteer that I'm thinking about in particular, who always kind of entered into the state with the experience of being eaten alive, and it was almost a sexual kind of being eaten alive. It was a very complex mix of emotions for him, but it was definitely a feeling of being consumed, both in an oral and in a kind of sexual manner.
Well, I mention this because in the abduction phenomenon, there are many people who feel that a big part of it has to do with the eating of souls, that people's memories and experiences and all of the emotions that they've had in their lives are there to be consumed. And one of the most powerful experiences I ever had with the visitors was that in a series of meetings, mental meetings, I had set up what would be a face-to-face physical meeting. And this was really scary for me because I was alone with this at the time. It was just a few months after I'd had my first close encounter in late 85. So I was very, very wary of what might be happening and not at all sure that what I was thinking was happening and what actually was happening were the same thing. So anyway, I woke up one morning, the morning when this meeting was supposed to take place, and I went down to the meeting place, and as I was walking down there, I heard something, one of these little ships that they had, which when they were stopped or idling, they made a kind of clanking noise. It was very distinctive. It sounded like a defective dishwasher. You couldn't miss it. And it was making that noise down in the meadow beyond the woods I was in. And then suddenly I stopped because it was just overwhelming to me. And I heard a terrible voice inside my head saying, come on, so rough and so mean that it frightened me, and I couldn't go on. And I turned around and I walked back to the house, and I felt but did not see something coming behind me. And I heard over the woods 3 of the most poignant, ineffable cries, unbelievably beautiful. Sounds that remain the single most emotionally filled and rich sounds I've ever heard. I stepped into the house, and then I went up to my wife's, where my wife was, because I could feel seemed to be something in the house. And it was scary, and I wanted to be with her because I was afraid it would hurt her. And I went there, and then suddenly there was not taken from me but returned to me babyhood memories of coming out of the womb and of first walking. So vivid, Rick, that they were, they're so vivid I'll never forget them again. The childhood amnesia was lifted. In other words, the opposite of what we were talking about. Not having a memory taken, but having an incredible memory given back. What do you make of that? Well, I'll ask you in just a minute because we have to take another break. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. We're talking with Rick Strassman. And Rick is going to be talking to William Henry also in the subscriber section. So don't miss that. This is really fascinating stuff. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. And Rick, I hope you don't mind my challenging you in a way with these things because I think you have a big part of the key here, and I'm not sure that anyone knows what it is, including you, or certainly not me, because there's a kind of a gulf between the scientific community's fear of seeing this as something in the physical world and our desire to understand it at the same time. And I think it bleeds into the physical world all the time, frankly, personally.
Well, yeah. Well, the kinds of questions that our studies raised and your experiences raised, they go to the heart of the matter of the interface between the spiritual and the physical. It's a very slippery kind of borderland there, It's kind of the borderland between science and religion, which has always been kind of a, demilitarized, zone. It's fraught with all kinds of uncertainties, ambiguities, conflicts, theoretical, crosstalk that's very difficult to understand, to make some, kind of progress within. You were speaking about your memory as a child. There's this thing called state-specific memory in psychology. If you're in a specific or in a, particular state of mind when an event happens, and you're not in that state of mind later on, it's difficult, to remember the event itself. And only later, if you're in the same state of mind, can you remember an event that took place in a comparable one. So that's been kind of used in terms of explaining how people are able to remember things, that they did when they were drunk, only if they are, in the future also drunk, or under the influence of a specific, kind of drug, or in a specific state of consciousness. So you may have been able, to have remembered those experiences from your childhood, because of your brain, being in the same state of consciousness.
As when I was first walking.
As when you were first walking, later on as an adult, when you were undergoing that experience. It was, an analogous state of consciousness. It's an analogous state of consciousness that you may have been in at, both of those moments, as an adult at one time and as an infant the other time.
That's fascinating because, of course, the memory was so vivid and so real and filled with all of the little minutiae that was in my mother's room at the time. It was amazing that because we have such amnesia about our childhoods, that this could even be, and the strangeness of the birth experience, the sense of cold and these flashing goggle eyes. It was really scary. It was terribly scary. And
DMT levels increase with stress, and I've speculated that at the time of birth, which is clearly a hugely stressful experience, for the newborn, that there is a lot of DMT released. And if you were in, an extremely alert kind of, hyper state as an adult, during that time later on, as you're describing, there also may have been a large amount of DMT in your brain at that time too. So that kind of, ties in with the concept of state-specific memory there.
That would